Did we ever lose our minds and fall apart, knowing we're the only one?
We as a people overhear conversations and sometimes with a cocktail in our hand, and we become authorities on what we heard, but we didn't read the book. Why don't you shock me by reading a whole book, every page of it, then quote correctly when you're quoting?
Hang on to the world as it spins around.
All right, peace, family. My name is Asafo Shaka Sekou, and we welcome you to another lecture that's being sponsored by the bARTer and Build think tank. The title of tonight's lecture is, I'll pull up the slides here. I want to thank each of y'all for helping with the technical assistance. Okay, so the title of tonight's presentation is Why Mentoring and Tutoring Are Not Enough for Black Children. Now, I know, those of you who are watching this or will watch this in the future, because this is going up on our YouTube channel as well. I want to ask you a question. I want you to look at this slide, and I want you to see what it says. It says, the title, and I repeat, Why Mentoring and Tutoring Are Not Enough for Black Children. I want to ask you a question. I know you wouldn't be able to respond verbally, but I want you to answer this question to yourselves, those of you who are watching this. Does that slide say why we should not mentor and tutor Black children? No, it doesn't say that, right? Does it say why mentoring and tutoring are bad for Black children? Does it say that? No, it doesn't, does it? Does it say why mentoring and tutoring Black children is a waste of time? It doesn't say that either, does it? What does it say? I want you to read what it says. Why mentoring and tutoring are not enough for Black children. I want you to understand that this is mentoring, tutoring Black children is fine. We don't have a problem with that. What we're maintaining in this presentation is that it is simply not enough. We have too many people out here saying that, well, I'm about solutions. I'm for doing solutions. And what their solutions generally are a mentoring program or an art program or something like that, but you're not dealing with the social and political and economic milieu that is dominated by white supremacy. And we're sending our kids out there with these skills that we're giving to them through these programs, and those skills are rendered moot by the system that we're sending them out into. We would do better, in addition to having the mentoring and the tutoring, also working in an organized fashion to change the system where when our children go out with these skills that we're giving them in these programs, those skills will actually matter, okay? So like I said, this presentation is brought to you by the bARTer and Build think tank. And you see our, if you want to contact us, you can find us on Facebook under bARTer and Build think tank. You can also email us at barter.buildthinktank@gmail.com. Okay. Also, no presentation that I will ever do. Well, I'm not going to guarantee that, but more than likely, most of the presentations that I'll do, I won't charge any money for. No one has to pay anything to see it. But donations are always welcome. You see the Cash App cash tag there. $ Damian Fowler. That's the name that my parents gave to me when I was born. Asafo Shaka Sekou is my nom de plume. Okay, so if you're interested in making a donation, there it is. Okay, so some of the suggested readings for tonight, just for you to take away from this discussion. I'll just kind of go through a few of these. Teaching Critical Thinking by Bell Hooks. Young, Gifted, and Black by Claude Steele, Teresa Perry, and Asa Hilliard. An important one, Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children by Amos, and also The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child. A little bit further down, number 7, Too Much Schooling and Too Little Education, A Paradox of Black Life in White Societies by Dr. Mwalimu Shuja. Okay. Number 8, America's Education Deficit and the War on Youth by Dr. Henry Giroux. Very important book. So those are some suggested readings if you're more interested in this topic. Let's move on. So the premise of this presentation, number 1, I maintain that the overemphasis on mentoring and tutoring Black students as the solution to the issues they face is short-sighted and vapid. All right. Number 2, by any standard we would use to measure the success of most mentoring programs, there are structural forces in play that render those successes impotent. We're going to go into it in the presentation. By whatever standard you want to measure the success of your program, when those students, those children are sent out into the world with those skills that you've given them, the system has a way of rendering those skills moot if those skills are being possessed by Black children, right? Many of these programs are focused on fixing Black youth, dealing with Black deficits, and making them acceptable in the eyes of the market rather than changing the system. Very important point. And lastly, I believe most of the leaders in these programs operate out of weakness and fear. You know, there's a lot of people who do these programs who actually depend on the system for these programs to be funded. Depend on the system for these programs to be seen as legitimate in the eyes or in the view of the public. And if you're focused on the system as being your legitimator, you're focusing on the system as being your point of validation, your program is never going to work, no matter how quote unquote successful it is. Just a quick disclaimer here. And like I said before at the beginning, this is not an attack on mentoring and tutoring programs. These types of programs are vital to helping Black youth when coupled with a grassroots movement that tackles the structural factors hurting Black youth that these programs are seemingly incapable of neutralizing. Okay, very important point. I'm not putting down people's programs. What I'm saying, if it's just the program, it's not enough. I just want to make that clear. Let's continue. All right, so the first section, I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible because I definitely want to get to questions and answers, okay? So the first slide here, Black youth, violence, and criminality. I have 2 quotes here. The first one is by Dr. Sharcy McIntyre, and it goes as follows. I place the practice of imprisoning African Americans, particularly the males, in the founding fathers' structural design of this nation. I claim that our incarcerations occur not because of criminality or accidents of injustice, but due to the structural design of this nation. Institutionalization became the ultimate solution in which whites addressed the problem of having free Blacks in this country. And that's from her book called Criminalizing a Race, Free Blacks During Slavery. And the second quote here, if we are not to speak of individuals as criminal, can we then refer to a criminal society? I think we can describe our society as criminal. Indeed, I think we must. And that was Edwin Shure, Our Criminal Society. So we're living in what Amos Wilson calls a crimogenic society. It's a society that produces criminality, that rewards criminality, that legitimizes criminality, even as it rhetorically claims to be against criminality. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. So this is from Amos Wilson's book, Understanding Black Adolescent Male Violence, Its Remediation and Prevention. And this is from pages 19 and 20. So I wanted to point out, as we're doing these programs, the political and economic context of anomie among Black youth. Now, what is anomie? Anomie is a term that was coined by a sociologist named Emile Durkheim, French sociologist. And the literal translation of anomie would probably come out to something to the effect of rulelessness. So when you're living in a society or in a community where there's no moral boundaries, there are no roots, there's no focus on the public or the group, and it's boiled down to the individual and dog eat dog, you're going to have the type of behaviors that we see in our young people. And what type of society are we talking about? So let's look at here. Let's look. High levels of adult and adolescent unemployment and poverty, inadequate preschool, primary, and secondary school education, an overwhelmingly segregated urban existence. Many places are more segregated now than they were 50 years ago. A postmodern, deindustrialized world. We're talking about the rise of neoliberalism, which is an offshoot of fascism. Neoliberalism, for those who may not be familiar with the term, neoliberalism is an ideology that says that focuses on the primacy and the domination of the market, of the capitalist free market, over the affairs of society, over the public. Okay, so everything that was once in the hands of the public or governed by the public, neoliberalism dictates that it should be handed over to the hands of corporate interests. So, for example, schools are a public entity. They're funded by the public. The leaders of the school districts are answerable to the public. They're elected by the public. What neoliberalism says is that the school system, the public schools, should be under the control of private interests, of corporate interests. That's why they talk about privatizing schools, right? So that's an example of what I'm talking about. A time of conservative, hostile governments on a national and state level. So we can talk about, here in South Carolina, we have Henry McMaster, who's doing his number on the economy. On the national level, we can talk about Trump, to be sure, but we can also talk about Joe Biden, who seems to be quite comfortable with screaming at Black people whenever they actually confront him about doing something specifically for Black people. Let's go to the next slide. So a continue of this list. A world of television and mass marketing advertising specifically and scientifically designed to evoke consumatory desires and artificial needs in adolescents and children. Family dissolution. A world led and controlled by violence-prone, hedonistically oriented, criminally inclined political and economic leadership. When we talked about the Republicans, and this goes right into the context of what we saw at the Capitol on January the 6th, right? Also a time of dramatic demographic changes in the American population and changes in power and economic relationships in the world. Mercantile minorities, NAFTA, Trans-Pacific Partnership, globalization, etc. So all of these things that I just listed, like I said, they came out of Amos Wilson's book. These are having an effect on the way how the system treats Black children, how the system perceives Black children, how the system manipulates the thinking of Black children and Black communities in general, how it develops the lens through which Black youth see the world. Okay. Next slide here. Male youth violence from a historical and global perspective. Again, we want to put everything in its proper perspective. So the violence that we're seeing in the community is not unique to Black people. Throughout history, wherever you find groups of people who are under domination, who are living under oppressive conditions, who are, political subjugation and economic stagnation, you're going to find internecine violence and internecine conflicts. So I listed here a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. So you talk about Black on Black violence and gangs in Algeria during the 1950s and 60s. And we have Frantz Fanon talking about that, even using the term horizontal violence to talk about the violence within the community itself, as opposed to vertical violence. Black on Black violence in inner city America during the post-civil rights era. And that's from Race, Reform, and Rebellion by Dr. Manning Marable. Because we talk about older generations of Black people thinking that the violence that we're seeing is a recent phenomenon when it's not. In fact, we can trace almost singularly trace the rise of neoliberalism and the rise of mass incarceration with the rise of this violence in our communities. Number 3, the emergence of, like I said, horizontal violence among Irish youth in the American North during the 1900s. And this comes from the book Ethnic America by Dr. Thomas Sowell. I wouldn't recommend any other book by Thomas Sowell. He's a reactionary economist who works for the conservative Hoover Institute. But this book I think is very instructive to read, because in this book, Thomas Sowell points out that the deviance of different groups when they were undergoing economic stagnation and oppression. Okay, so you look at the Irish for a second, and the Italians and the Jews and others, and that's going to be number 4 as well. When these people were under ghetto-like conditions, Black people are the only people who have been ghettoized in America. Okay, so I'm not saying that these people lived in ghettos, but ghetto-like conditions, when they were under oppressive conditions, where there was political subjugation and economic stagnation. Okay, they engaged in the same acts of violence. They formed gangs. They sold drugs. What was the illegal drug during that time that we're talking about? We're talking about illegal alcohol. So alcohol was made illegal. Prohibition, right? So these folks, these Irish, Italians, and Jews, they formed gangs. They sell the drugs on their turf. They protected their turf. They did drive-by shootings. They fought each other in the street. Innocent bystanders got shot. They shook down people in their own communities for protection money, right? They beat up their own people. They terrorized their own communities, right? And this money, this ill-gotten money that they got from the alcohol trade, the alcohol prohibited alcohol, what did they do with it? They engaged in conspicuous consumption. They went to the club. They spent money on clothes. They spent money on cars. They spent money on jewelry. They did everything back then with illegal alcohol money that we tend to attribute to the hip hop generation today. Okay. So what's the connection that we're drawing here? We're drawing the connection of oppressive conditions bringing this type of deviance out of people. And if you want to change that deviance or neutralize that deviance, you have to neutralize the oppressive conditions. This is not an issue of individual behavior. This is an issue of systematic oppression causing this behavior to exist among oppressed people. Okay, and also gang violence. Number 5, gang violence in South American nations due to the current drug trade. Again, going back to oppressive conditions, drugs, things like that. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so entering the school to prison pipeline, criminalizing Black students. So these points here are from the advancement projects, education on lockdown, the schoolhouse to jailhouse track. In recent years, traditional school punishment have been supplemented by criminal penalties. Even nonviolent acts are now subject to citations or tickets, or arrests and referrals to juvenile or criminal courts. Beefing up the prevalence of campus police, cameras, metal detectors, tasers, canine units, and biometric hand readers in predominantly Black schools in the name of safety and security. Okay, so we see this building up. Number 3, due to racial disparities in school discipline, students of color are getting pushed out and thrown out of school at alarming rates. The last sentence is the most important. There is no evidence that Black and Latino students misbehave more than their white peers. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Again, another point about school discipline and school behavior. Although discriminant analysis suggests that, give me 1 second, I'm sorry, y'all. Okay. Although discriminant analysis suggests that disproportionate rates of office referrals and suspensions for boys are due to increased rates of misbehavior, no support was found for the hypothesis that African American students act out more than other students. Look at the underlined portion. Rather, African American students appear to be referred to the office for less serious and more subjective reasons. Coupled with extensive and highly consistent prior data, these results argue that disproportionate representation of African Americans in office referrals, suspension, and expulsion is evidence of a pervasive and systematic bias that may well be inherent in the use of exclusionary discipline. Okay, so let's move on. So we're talking about again, going back to the mentoring programs, because we're talking about mentoring. Oh, these kids are acting up in school. They need mentors. They need people who are willing to be perfect role models for them, so they'll know how to behave in the classroom and not get kicked out. But what we're seeing here is that they're being kicked out of school and they're being subject to exclusionary disciplinary practices in spite of the fact that they are well behaved in school. I just showed you the data that says that there's no evidence that Black students are acting out more than any other group or more than white students. So there's nothing else to conclude but the fact that the system is exclusively targeting Black students and increasingly brown students as well. All right, so this comes from Dr. Angela Davis's book. Also, this article right here, Mass Racism, Mass Racism, Reflections on the Prison Industrial Complex. This is from her book as well, called Are Prisons Obsolete? So you're looking here, just a quick list of some of the companies that benefit from prison labor. I'll read the italicized portion here. Prisoners do data entry for Chevron, make telephone reservations for TWA, raise hogs, shovel manure, make circuit boards, limousines, waterbeds, and lingerie for Victoria's Secret, all at a fraction of the costs of free labor. And I want you to look down at the bottom here in the small writing. In an age of surplus and redundant labor, Black bodies have become worthless to corporations unless they are behind cages. So as long as they're walking the streets of Philadelphia, as long as they're walking the streets of Chicago, as long as they're walking the streets of Myrtle Beach or Baltimore, in an age of redundant and surplus labor, Corporations, these bodies are worthless to the ruling class. They need to take these black bodies and put them behind cages so they could be used for free labor. So the question that ends this section is, how does mentoring black boys to behave better, or black students in general, to behave better in the classroom and the community, inoculate them from the structural forces that form the regime of mass incarceration? How does it answer the social, historical, political, and economic factors that come into play? Okay, so I want you to think about that question. All right, let's move on to the next slide. All right, so promoting academic achievement. So the first one was talking about behavior, right? The second one's academic. This section is on academic achievement and getting degrees and all like that. So this is a lengthy quote. I love this quote by Dr. Amos Wilson. It's one of my favorite quotes by him. And I know it's lengthy, but I'm going to read it because I just like reading it. We have to recognize that the educated individual is the craziest of all individuals. That the educated individual is the most dangerous of all individuals. When this world comes to its end, it will not be brought to an end by the muggers on the street. It will not be brought to an end by the drug addicts, by the prostitutes, by the youth gangs. It's going to be brought to an end by people with PhD degrees. It's going to be brought to an end by people who study physics and mathematics, people who spent 15 and 20 and 30 years in school. It's going to be brought to an end by people who live in nice clipped lawns with houses on the corner, with neat hedges, 2-car garages, and nice little well-spoken children. The people who sent their children to private school. And one day they'll go off to work and give their wives a nice little bourgeois kiss. And then they'll go down and sit in front of the console of their computer, then proceed to blow themselves up along with the rest of the world. What kind of education is it that leads to these kinds of people? These people are being educated into madness. Again, that's Dr. Amos Wilson. All right. Okay, so these are two reports here. A college degree is no guarantee, and what we get wrong about closing the racial wealth gap. These are two very effective, well, very devastating reports that in part focus on why a college degree, why a college education or education in general is not the great panacea that we're teaching our youth that it is. Okay, we want to have an understanding that, you know, because as we were growing up, and I'm sure everyone who's watching this can agree with me, as we were growing up, we were told constantly that, you know, education will get you, will lead to equality. Education will lead to liberation. Education, degree, right? But what we're seeing more and more literature coming out that is not the case, that these degrees are not the panacea, are not the golden grail, are not the silver bullet that we've been taught that they are, and that we're teaching our young people in these programs that they are. Okay, let's continue on. Okay, so this is another great report. I love the title, Bootstraps Are for Black Kids. Okay, so while we're teaching our kids that, oh, you have to go out there and make something of yourself, you got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, you got to do this and you got to do that, and you got to burn the midnight oil, and you got to join the right fraternity, and you got to do, and you got to do all this stuff. White folks are doing everything they can just to make the world better, so their kids will be remove all the obstacles so their kids will be successful. And we're the only ones who are lecturing our children about pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. Okay. Now, also paradoxically in this report, even though it's demonstrated that black parents have less wealth than white parents overall, black parents also spend more of their wealth or invest more of their wealth into their children's educations. So one of the good things about this report, there are many good things about it, but one of the good things that are pertinent to this discussion is that it shreds the idea that black families are less inclined to focus on their children's education. It shreds the idea that black communities are less concerned about educational attainment than white communities. Okay, so great report to read. Another report here. Umbrellas don't make it rain. Why studying and working hard isn't enough for black Americans. You should read that report. Talk about education and racialized wealth. Look at the graph here, the illustration. Education is not the great equalizer. Now I want you to look. Now it's difficult to see the slide here, but what that slide is saying, you'll be able to see it if you pull up the report. You should be able to find it anywhere. What this slide is telling us, that graph is telling us, is that on every level of educational attainment, black wealth is far outpaced by white wealth. Okay? In fact, a black family headed by a black family headed by a college graduate will have less wealth than a white family headed by a high school dropout. I want you to understand what I just said. A white family headed by a high school dropout will have more wealth than a black family whose head of the family graduated from college. Okay? So again, we're talking about education. You get your degree. You've been told all your life, okay, well, get the degree and everything will be all right. But you're going out, you're taking that degree out into a world or out into a labor market that is extremely racist, that'll give white folks more opportunities to build wealth, even though they don't have the type of education you have, and that they'll give them the opportunities and deprive you of those same opportunities. Okay, let's move forward. Again, this is another graph showing it in a different way. Now, the source for this graph is what we get wrong about closing the racial wealth gap. All right, that came out in April 2018. So if anyone wants any of these reports, taking us at the email address that we showed you earlier, and we'll put that up. Larry, if you could put that in the comment section, the email address. Okay. So college degrees and black employment. So I'm not going to read the entire thing here. This is from the New York Times. I'm going to start with the second bullet in the interest of time. Various academic studies have confirmed that black job seekers have a harder time than whites. A study published several years ago in the American Economic Review titled, "Are Emily and Greg More Employable Than Lakeisha and Jamal?" found that applicants with black-sounding names receive 50% fewer callbacks than those with white-sounding names. So, your polished little resume, you come from Howard or Morris or any of these great black schools, or you come from even a white school for that matter. You send your resume, you submit your resume for this job, and the human resources officer looks at the resume and they see Lakeisha Jones is going in the trash. They see Jamal or Tyrone Bellamy going in the trash. They see Hannah Hickenlooper Oh, that sounds like a qualified person. Oh, let's give them a call back. Let's give them a call back. Okay. They see Chad Bennington. Oh, let's give that person a call back. Okay, good, good, good. Just by your name, just under suspicion of being black. You haven't even been found guilty yet. Just under the suspicion that you may be a black person, you're less likely to get a call back for a job. A more recent study published this year, or the year of this article, in the Journal of Labor Economics found white, Asian, and Hispanic managers tended to hire more whites and fewer blacks than black managers did. Okay, let's continue on. Okay, so this is another. Now, this is a quote from an article in The Atlantic. African Americans with college degrees are twice as likely to be unemployed as other graduates. I want to point out, so you see the top paragraph, and then there's a sentence in the middle, and then the bottom paragraph. I want to point out the middle sentence. Okay, white men with recent criminal histories are far more likely to receive calls back than black men with no criminal record at all. A quote from John Schmidt at the bottom here. We absolutely aren't trying to discourage people from going to college, said John Schmidt, a senior economist at the Washington-based Center for Economic and Policy Research, who co-authored this study. College degrees do have value, but what we are trying to show is that this is not about individuals or individual effort. There is simply overwhelming evidence that discrimination remains a major feature of the labor market, unquote. Okay. So another aspect what we're talking about here is student loans. Okay, so in our drive to get an education, well, I'll read it to you. This is from What We Get Wrong About Closing the Racial Wealth Gap, another report. Black students are more likely to take on student loans and accumulate student loan debt. And they are more likely than white students to drop out of a university because of financial concerns. Ironically, listen carefully, ironically, their wealth position could deteriorate because of their intense motivation to pursue higher education. So we're not only talking about colleges or getting some college education, at least benefiting black students. In some cases, it can make their wealth situation even worse, depending on the amount of loans they had to take to get whatever amount of college education they did receive. Okay, let's continue on. So the question that's going to wrap up this section, I ask, how does the academic achievement and college degree attainment stressed by these mentoring programs dismantle the racism inherent in the labor market? Another question for you to think about. Let's move on. Okay, so honorable mentions and intentions. So we talked about black student behavior, black children's behavior. We talked about academic achievement. And now I want to just focus just very quickly on financial literacy, because a lot of these programs are now implementing financial literacy courses or financial literacy education into their mentoring programs. So these two, this A and B right here, are from What We Get Wrong About Closing the Racial Wealth Gap. And it says as follows. The finding advanced in peer-reviewed articles in economic journals is clear. There is no evidence that Black Americans have a lower savings rate than white Americans once household income is taken into account. Once income is controlled, if anything, Black families actually have a slightly higher savings rate than their white counterparts. But wait a minute. Why is it that everyone comes up on social media or Facebook or their YouTube videos or their podcasts or whatever, talking about how black people just need to spend their money wiser? Black people are living beyond their means. Black people are wasting their money on useless junk, and that's why we can't do nothing. What's going on here? But the data that we're looking at here says that black folks actually have a higher rate of savings than white folks. So why is it that we're so, again, and I say this all the time, and Geechee will tell you and others will tell you, that everything that we're being told, everything that's coming into our minds from this society has to be fact checked, has to be researched. We can't take things at face value. We cannot take things as being so axiomatic that they can't be questioned. Okay. So now we're gonna have people come out here with the belief that black people need to learn how to spend their money better and manage their money better. And we're going to develop all types of programs to help people get this financial literacy that they clearly already have. And we're going to cycle our children through these programs. And we're going to, in some cases, cycle young adults through these programs. And they're going to come out with these financial management skills, and it's still not going to do anything. Okay. And let me tell you why. This goes to the letter B. Greater financial literacy can be valuable if an individual or household has finances to manage. Financial literacy without finances is meaningless. There is no magical way to transform no wealth into great wealth, simply by learning more about how to manage one's monetary resources. While wealth begets wealth, typically no wealth begets no wealth, regardless of how astute a money manager the person may be. These are some of the top economists who are dealing with the black economic condition. This comes from people like Sandy Darity and Derek Hamilton, and people like that. Okay. So I want to talk quickly about solutions. So a few quotes here. When you fall, don't analyze where you have fallen. Analyze where you have stumbled, by Hannibal Afrique. We must prove our prediction about the future with our action, George Jackson. And firewood will not collect itself, which is an Ugandan or African proverb. Okay. Okay, so this is another report. Again, we want to rely on the data for these discussions. Okay, we don't want to rely on opinion. We don't want to rely on perception. Okay, just because 5 people in your neighborhood went out and bought Jordans with their stimulus money doesn't mean all black folks, all 40 million black people are wasting money. Okay, get out of your own personal perception and look at the broader perception, and we can only do that through empirical data and research. Okay, so 10 solutions to bridge the racial wealth gap. And so there are 10 solutions. I only mentioned 5 here because these were the most pertinent. I would encourage you to look at this report or study this report as well, so you can learn about all 10. But I only went through and picked out the 5 that were most pertinent to this particular discussion. Baby bonds, a guaranteed employment and significantly raise the minimum wage, invest in affordable housing, Medicare for all, and significantly raise taxes on the ultra wealthy. One of these that I want to point out the most is baby bonds. Those of you, I only came across this and started learning more about it as I began reading the work of Derek Hamilton and Sandy Darity. But baby bonds is such a magnificent idea. In fact, it's actually, there's the American Opportunity Accounts Act that Cory Booker has proposed in the Congress, which is kind of like a baby bonds program. All right. So baby bonds, it's a program in which every American citizen, child who's born in America, automatically gets money in an account. That amount of money can vary from $1,000 to $20,000. Okay. So every year, more money is put in that account. Now, the children nor the parents, nobody has access to this account. The child only has access to this account, which money goes into it every year from the government. Money goes into this account every year until the child turns 18 years old. Okay. When the child turns 18, now they have a nest egg, a starting floor, a financial floor that they can use to go to college, buy a home or some other wealth building asset, or start a business. Okay. I've heard estimates that saying that that these accounts, by the time the children turn 18, could be as large as $60,000. So that's a significant amount of money for an 18-year-old to be able to now, I have this money, I'm 18, I don't have to take out loans to go to school now, or I can go and buy a home now, or I can invest in starting up a business now. Okay. So every child born in America, every American child who's an American citizen, when they're born, they get this money in a government account. It's kind of like a trust fund. Like rich people, their children have trust funds, they're trust fund babies. We just want to spread that idea to everybody's children. And the amount of money that would go into the account for the child is based on the socioeconomic status of the child's parents. So if you're a lower socioeconomic status, you're going to get more money. If you have a higher socioeconomic status, you get less money, right? So guaranteed employment, things like that, that kind of speaks for itself. Invest in affordable housing, Medicare for all. We have data here that makes it quite clear that how Medicare for all would benefit Black people, and also obviously significantly raising taxes on the ultra wealthy. There will be more money to there's another thing I should have put in here. It's not included in this report, but we can also discuss a universal basic income, where everybody under a certain socioeconomic level, you get money from the government free of charge, no strings attached. You get money every month from the government, okay, which can be about $1,500, $2,000. That would have to be determined by the government. Now, the UBI, I mentioned the UBI because it would be extremely easy to pay for. It is easy to pay for, because you would cover 80% of the UBI by taxing the UBI itself, 80%, and the other 20% would be increasing the capital gains tax on the ultra wealthy, right? So it's easy to pay for. Let's go to the next slide. Supporting the social justice movement, the Poor People's Campaign, the Fight for 15 movement, the union movements at companies like McDonald's and Walmart, Grand Strand Action Together, that's more of a local group here in Horry County, and of course taxing the rich. So these are kind of social justice movements that we could throw our support behind as well. Let's go to the next slide. So there must be a grassroots social movement dedicated to dismantling the school to prison pipeline. I think so. Real quick, and I should have mentioned this earlier. So Black people's time in America have been defined by the peculiar institutions that have been implemented to control their bodies. All right. So what I mean by that is, first it was slavery. Then it was Jim Crow. Then it was the ghetto. And now it's mass incarceration. So what I'm speaking about actually comes from the French sociologist Louis Vacan. He talks about the peculiar institutions. And also this is made mention of in Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. All right. So right now, we're still dealing with the fourth peculiar institution, which is mass incarceration. The school to prison pipeline is an off branch of the system of mass incarceration. In fact, it's a pipeline. They call it a pipeline because it's feeding. That's the feeder tube for the system of mass incarceration. We want to get them while they're young and groom them for prison. So by the time they're old enough, we can send them on through the pipeline on into the prison system. Okay. So we here in Horry County and other places, we have been fighting vehemently against the school to prison pipeline. And that's one of the major things that we would need to dismantle over and above anything that we're talking about regarding doing stuff for the youth or doing stuff for young people, okay? If you really want to help young people, we need to destroy this damn school to prison pipeline and destroy this system of mass incarceration, okay? Damn teaching them how to tie a tie, to hell with teaching them how to eat with the salad fork rather than the damn entree fork. Damn all that foolishness. I was about to curse, sorry. We just need to destroy this system, this school to prison pipeline system, okay? And this movement must include actions of civil disobedience and direct action. And these are some suggestions, 1, 2, 3, 4, some suggestions that I propose that we could be doing on a massive scale. Staging protests to shut down. Now, when I first did this presentation, it was for an organization here in Horry County. So I have Horry County school boards, but this could work at any school board or any school district, okay? Number 2, a die-in on the school district or police premises. Number 3, picket lines at the most punitive schools in the districts. And 4, support organizations like the Coalition for Youth Justice and Every Black Girl, okay? You can look them up as well. They're great organizations. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, now, so we have the grassroots aspect of it, but also we have to consider the fact of a time for independent Black education institution building. We have to keep in mind that the long-term goal, obviously, there's obvious value in starting and growing a grassroots movement and direct action and things like that. But the longer term goal must be, we have to keep focus on the longer term goal of independent Black institution building. Excuse me. So this slide here, it focuses on, well, I'll just read the 1 and 2 right here. Black children enjoy what pioneering child psychologist Dr. Amos Wilson calls a natural head start when compared to white children in sensory motor and intellectual development. Now, this is from Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children. So our children they develop faster with their sensory motor skills, and their intellectual development is faster than white children. Okay, he discusses it in detail in the book. If you haven't read it, please, I recommend you reading it. Secondly, number 2, case study after case study shows that when Black children are taught from a pedagogical standpoint that reflects their cultural, historical development, they not only match but outmatch their white peers on standardized tests and intellectual ability in and out of the classroom. And that's from the book Young, Gifted, and Black. Okay, so what am I saying? I'm saying that if we're in an education system that is geared almost exclusively, not almost, but exclusively to white students, and we're introducing Black students into that system, of course they're not going to do well in it. Of course they're not going to rise to the top or be as it's not going to bring out their full potential. It's not going to bring out or take advantage of their full intellectual development. Okay. So we have to keep that in mind. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. We also need to push a curricula that highlights the unique cultural, psychosocial, and historical development of children of color. Now, we're talking about, and that, look, I believe that can, long-term overall, I believe that can only be done if it's done through an independent educational, through independent educational institutions. So I want to read this. It's a rather lengthy quote. I want to read this to you because it's extremely important for what we're talking about. Now, this is from an article called Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, a critical examination of the conceptualization of the study of Black racial identity in America. It says the following: there is also a substantial and growing body of research demonstrating that a strong Black identity is linked to improved educational outcomes and higher academic achievements. So they're linking strong Black identity, pride in their Blackness, Afrocentric paradigm, Afrocentric mindset, Black consciousness to higher academic achievement. It goes on. Black youth with a strong positive racial identity place more importance on academic goals and career aspirations, are more likely to embrace education as a means of getting ahead, demonstrate greater enjoyment of an effort expended in the service of academic goals, and demonstrate higher levels of performance in academic settings as measured by grades, academic self-efficacy, and test scores. They were also more likely to pursue higher education and show increased investment in academic achievement over time. Again, the opposite is also true. We see poor educational outcomes when Black youth have a weak or negative racial identity. Also, and I didn't put this on the slide, maybe I should put it on for the next presentation. Let me also add, we've been told in these public school systems not to talk about Black oppression. And what was the main reason that we've always been told not to talk about Black oppression? We've been told not to talk about Black oppression because, oh, you're going to discourage the children. You're going to make the black kids feel bad. On the contrary, this very same report, this very same research article tells us very clear that telling Black youth about the oppression that's going on against Black people has the opposite effect. It doesn't discourage children. It actually encourages children to get an education and focus more in the classroom as a means of fighting back against the racist system that we're teaching them about. Okay? So this is a very important article to read. Again, it's Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, a critical examination of the conceptualization of the study of Black racial identity in education. Okay? Next slide, please. Okay. All right, so this is this slide here. I think this is the last slide. This slide is talking about the an example of what can happen when we have an independent Black institution that focuses on everything that we talked about regarding, African-centered consciousness, a pedagogy that's geared toward Black students and what have you, right? So this is the Marcus Garvey School. This school is highlighted in Amos Wilson's book, Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children. And it's discussed in other places. You can actually go to the website. It's called the Marcus Garvey School. It's in Los Angeles, California. And Amos Wilson, I got this from Amos Wilson's book. He lists the following achievements of the students at the school. So these are some of the things that the students are able to do at the school. Again, this is out of Amos Wilson's book. 2-year-olds learn to recite their alphabets in English, Swahili, and Spanish. 3-year-olds can recite Latin names of all the major bones in the body and can recognize all 50 states in a map, can cite their capitals with minimal assistance from teachers. It is commonplace for 4-year-old preschoolers to read from 3rd to 6th grade books. In fact, Garvey students are usually 3 or more grade levels above the national grade average in reading and math. At Garvey, algebra is taught in 4th grade and trigonometry and calculus are taught in the early grades. Lastly, Garvey 3rd grade students scored higher on both reading and math than 6th graders from a public school for gifted predominantly white children on identical tests administered to both classes. So what that last one is saying is very important. The leader of the Garvey school, Dr. Palmer, I think he's passed away now. He put out a challenge and he said, we'll spot any other school in the country 3 grade levels. So I'll put my 3rd graders against your 6th graders, right? He said, my 3rd graders will outperform any 6th grade class in this country in reading and math, okay? On the 6th grade test. So we're talking about both the 6th graders from Garvey and the 3rd graders from Garvey and the 6th graders from the opposing school taking the 6th grade test for math and reading. The Garvey students outperformed the 6th graders on the 6th grade reading and math test. Okay? The incredible intellectual feats achieved by the Garvey children are compounded by, 1, the fact that as a general rule, the teachers are hired based on their willingness to teach Black children the correct way, not based on what type of degrees they have. They generally have generally frowned upon hiring teachers with degrees. They train their own teachers. Number 2, the fact that this school accepts all Black children, whether they have been labeled gifted by the public school district or not. So we're not talking about just them getting, the gifted Black kids, and we're going to have the school just for the gifted Black kids. Every Black kid who applies, they try to accept and bring them in. This is what they do for Black students. Okay. So I think this is actually the last slide.
Cool, man. Appreciate you. We have so many comments and questions that's already coming in. But this is the Q&A session. Thank you for that timely, important presentation. Let's see what we got here. We got, some support from the people coming in. People loving the content, the bibliography, the references. Let's see. Start with some questions. Be beautiful, Hodier. Yeah. So one of the things I saw earlier about what's your thoughts about the especially as it pertains to this topic and it pertains to Black youth, about those. So there's this privilege and there's this space that's created for white success. And even though that is there, recently you have like white parents cheating, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see like these white parents cheating and not getting jail time. A Black woman, I think, did something about a school district and she got punished. Like, what are your thoughts about even some of those happenings, despite this stuff that we understand about schooling and mentoring and all these other things?
Well, it goes to show that number one, that the white students that we're constantly trying to compare our children to, the white children that we're constantly trying to compare our children to, those white children are extremely mediocre. Okay, they're extremely incompetent, and we've seen them demonstrate this time and time again. Even on a global stage, you see white American children not doing well on the global stage. Now you could talk about, well, blacks doing this. Well, we have a reason because of oppression. That's why we're not doing that well. But you don't have an excuse. What's your damn excuse?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you think you've been raised all your life to think you're the top dog and nothing can stop you and you're the greatest thing in the world and you still ain't living up to par. You're still not worth a damn. Even so, to where your parents have to cheat and lie to get you into these elite schools, right? So yeah, it's we have to stop constantly trying to compare our young people, our children, with their children. Okay, our children are on a higher level. They have a larger goal. We must have a larger goal in mind for our children than they have for theirs. You know, just like I do, we talk about education being revolutionary. Our education must be revolutionary because our education, the education that we give to our children, they're going to need that. They're going to have to use that education to overturn the system that is oppressing them.
Right.
While white children are going to receive it, are receiving and going to continue to receive a conservative education that maintains the power dynamic that already exists with the white at the top and the black on the bottom.
So for the people watching on Facebook, YouTube, thank you for coming in. Thank you for staying with us. This is a time that we want to do some Q&A. So any questions that you had about the lecture or questions that came up towards the end, but questions about the lectures, questions just in general, please type those questions in and we will answer those accordingly as we finish up the lecture. So before you told me, you told me about some, energy that you got, dealing with this and whether it's this lecture or some of the other things we might talk about, a lot of times people approach these things emotionally, right? And I'm glad that you did the disclaimer and you clear some things up at the beginning. But even when you do that or not do that, what are people hearing to make them so emotionally enraged at this lecture and the content of the lecture? What are they hearing?
So I've done this lecture, like I told you before, like I said during the presentation, I've done this lecture one time before, and they were about to run me out of there, man. They were pissed, and I think the reason for that is because it's a repudiation of the idea. It's a repudiation of the idea that they can just at least we're doing something. Okay, we have to move beyond at least we're doing something to doing what must be done. Because at least we're doing something is safe. At least we're doing something is it'll get you liked in the community. At least we're doing something is this kind of piecemeal knee jerk. Okay, we're going to, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. When we had here in Horry County, we had done the first ever conference regarding Black youth. That was for Horry, Georgetown, and Williamsburg counties. Okay, first one ever done. And what we were not going to do was have young people come in. In fact, it really wasn't even for young people. We weren't going to have young people come in and lecture them about how to dress for a job interview or pull their pants up or some old BS. We need to be done with that. We're past that. Okay. What we were trying to do is get the people to understand is that we have to organize around public policy that benefits Black youth and benefits Black people in general. And when, as we were developing, in fact, the picture on the flyer of with me looking off to the side with the beige shirt,
Mm-hmm.
that's actually me speaking at that conference. We were able to do the conference, and we had no support from any of these other programs, these mentoring programs, these tutoring programs, 100 Black men, you know, the little fraternities and sororities and all like that. We had no support from these other groups, okay? Because with what we were trying to do, we're actually talking about confronting the system, confronting the power structure in Horry, Georgetown, and Williamsburg counties, and try to get tangible things for our Black youth that will help our youth and help our communities. But see, these fraternities and sororities don't want to do that. 100 Black men don't want to do that. Jack and Jill don't want to do that because they're so tied and connected with the system that in order to do that, they might ruffle the wrong feathers or step on the wrong toes and put their own personal benefit in jeopardy.
Right.
Okay. So, so so to answer your question is that we're removing any pretense that a mentoring program or a tutoring program is just sufficient enough to count that as a solution to the problems our young people are facing.
So one of the things that that is very is on display at this point, with the pandemic, with presidential stuff, all these things are happening. I think a lot of people are coming into terms with they're not prepared. They really don't know what to do. They haven't been, it's almost like you got caught with your pants down, or you got caught that you didn't study, right? And so it's like, you're afraid to do something, but then you don't want to do something. You're hesitant. All these feelings, right? So I'm gonna ask the next two questions, which is very similar questions. But what are your suggestions for parents who can't homeschool their children due to work schedules? And if we have a good, I'm gonna say we have to go beyond mentoring, tutoring. So sound like there's a limited resource. What are your suggestions?
Well, I know, the easy question would be, oh, we got to build our own and all like that, and we have to, have our own institutions, and even though we might not be the ones who are educating our children, we can leave them in the hands of competent Black educators. That sounds nice. That sounds like the right thing to say, but that's not necessarily always the case. I know here in Horry County, there aren't any African-centered schools in Horry County. So a lot of people have no other choice but to have their children go to the public schools because there aren't either that or a white private school. So what I would suggest is that there has to be an organization of parents and stakeholders and people in the community who are willing to almost with almost as if it were a religious zeal, be vigilant over what their children are being taught, what their children are how their children are being treated in these public school systems. Okay. If they have to be there, we have to organize. There's no excuse for not organizing. Okay. We have to organize in a way to where, whenever something happens, there's a group of parents, there's a group of Black folk up there just like that, ready to raise hell. We need to be in these school board meetings. We need to be, shutting stuff down if it doesn't go our way or if our children are still being mistreated. Okay. So if you need to have your children in the public school system, there must be an organization in place to protect those children, protect the rights of those children, and ensure those children are receiving a quality education.
So this is a very similar one, but in your opinion, for those parents who aren't able to homeschool, what are your suggestions that you can offer to help parents combat against their children becoming deeply indoctrinated? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's pretty much the same thing. Like I just said, we have to be more vigilant about what's going on in these classrooms. Even if we assign, if the organization that I'm talking about can assign a parent who may be off that day, or assign a person, an elder in the community who's not working anymore, who's retired, to go to these classrooms and see what's going on in these classrooms, and then report back to the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sometimes I also think like I'm glad you brought up the religious zeal, because as we're studying in the bARTer and Build think tank and just organizing in general, there's always a reason why we can justify not being urgent about our kids in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to probably speak to the overall general to Black folks. There's a statement that's like, we ain't gonna change nothing until it hurts bad enough. So it's like, if you're in emergency mode, although you have to work every day, when you're in emergency mode, it don't matter what you gotta do, you're gonna kind of take that zeal.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think it will take to even get that zeal, or help people understand how serious certain things are? Like, I know there's groups out there that say everybody should stop what they're doing and focus on this, right? I know groups say that all the time, but what do you think it's going to take for people to see the importance, if it's schooling and education, or if it's something else, to kind of like be intentional and aggressive, militant, whatever you need to call it, about something as it pertains to our kids and our family, our lives, those things?
Well, again, we're being told by lackluster leadership, by piss poor leadership, that our ministers in the churches and our civic leaders and our politicians, that a lot of what's going on among these youth is their own fault, or it's an indication of some type of deviance in the Black community. And essentially, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, we're being told that our children are broken, and that these programs are here to fix broken children. Okay, when we need to understand, I think we would go a long way to understand that it's not our children who are broken, but the system is broken. Mm-hmm. And that the system needs to be fixed or thrown out altogether and replaced. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, as long as we're blaming the victim, and that's essentially what it is. Mm-hmm. We're very good at blaming the victim, blaming the powerless for what's happening. Okay? Mm-hmm. And we need to get away from blaming the powerless or blaming the victim, to putting the fault squarely where it should be, at the feet of the powerful. Mm-hmm. Okay? And once we start doing that, and once we realize that, and that our children aren't broken, and that our children aren't deviant, and that our children don't need to be fixed, and that our children, a haircut and then pulling their pants up and knowing how to tie a tie and knowing how to eat with the right fork during dinner isn't going to change a damn thing. Mm-hmm. Once we realize all of that, and realize that the only change is going to come from us, going up against the system, that's when change will happen. And that's when we'll realize that we need to have more skin in the game. As long as I could drop my son off to the Freedom Readers so they can, read some books after school and think that's supposed to change something, of course I'm not going to do anything. I could drop him off and then go on to work, or what have you,
I love it. After school, African-centered groups of Black parents in a neighborhood that meets one or more times a week on Zoom with their own African-centered scientific curriculum, with each parent taking lead one time each week with the kids. So I guess Len is talking about like some resources out there. I guess is there other resources that you know of that you can call out And the last part, I'm very appreciative that you said that, because dropping your kids off, or like finding the way that you can be the least involved, seems to be a common theme around all kind of like anything that you think of when you're organizing people, like, because we're taught with this mindset of like, make your money work for you, like do the least as possible and like receive all the harvest, right? And so are there other resources out there, that you can think of? But again, I want you to hammer that thing home again of like, yo, if you want something to change, then like you literally have to be active. There's no way for us to get to where we're going, where people on the sound of our voice or people who can visibly see us, there's no way that we can get to where we're going if they just kind of like chill or like, think it's gonna get better or like a hope or something.
Well, the long-term goal is always independent institution building. That's the long-term goal. But that's not going to happen next year. Okay. So until we can have the resources available to us, to be able to build independent institutions. See, and let me tell you why it can't be right now. That we shouldn't, okay, we're just going to pull all our kids out and, open up a garage somewhere and educate them and, what have you. Okay. Number one, we don't have the infrastructure in our communities to be able to educate the thousands of children. Okay. And the reason we don't have the infrastructure is because we spend all of our money in taxes to the public school infrastructure. Okay. So what you're suggesting, those people who would say that, what we're suggesting is that what they're suggesting is that we're going to take all our kids out. We're still going to pay these white folks taxes. And we're going to take the little bit that's left behind that we have left to educate black kids. Okay, but the bulk of our money in taxes is still going to go to the white kids because they're going to be the only ones left in the school. Okay, so we're still subsidizing white education and giving scraps to our kids in the garage or in wherever. So no, if anything, we need to be having something set up to where, okay, let's take those taxes that we've been given to this public school system, and we're gonna keep that money, and we're gonna invest that in educating our own children. Okay, but that type of work, comes through direct action, comes through grassroots organizing. Okay. Right. You can't have the institution building without the grassroots direct action and organizing.
Octavia says, I'm guessing that the Garvey School in California was private, and then Geechee One, if you can tell us more about what you're saying. You said that's really, what's it? But time ain't really on our side. Respect, Mama, but time ain't really on our side right now. So I don't know exactly what you're saying or what you're referring to. So give us a little bit more what you're saying.
What I think he's referring to is what I said as far as years, like we're talking about institution building being a longer process than we give it credit for.
Okay.
So I think he's directly responding to like we wouldn't have like an independent institution next year. Right.
Oh, right. Respect. Right. But time ain't. Yeah. I guess what I'm saying when he says, but time ain't on our side, I'm saying, is he saying that we don't have time for that, what you're saying, or if he agreeing with you? I'm not sure.
What I think he's saying, and I'm sure he can speak for himself, or he can, add more in the chat. But what I'm taking from that is him saying, yeah, it's a long process, but we are going to have to kind of put the pedal to the metal when it comes to institution building.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm saying, but yeah. So but I'm saying that if it's going to, it would have to be done right. it would have to be preceded by, like I said, a grassroots organized grassroots movement to, you know, shut stuff down. And you want the pain to stop, we redistribute the pain, like Dr. King said, and we let these crackers know that if you want the pain to stop, give us the money you owe us so we can educate our own children.
Yeah. The Garvey School, was that it private in Cali?
Yeah, I believe it's a private school. Yes.
Okay. Len said, what's the bridge between public school support and attendance in our own institutions? Asafo addressed some of that with a grassroots effort.
Yeah, so it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Again, this is a two-pronged effort, and you know, we're not going to be able to just jump directly into independent institutions. That there are levels. You know, the first level is like the movement building, okay, and the next level is the institution building.
Right.
But you're not going to have an institution that's going to be fully funded or even publicly supported or community supported without the movement building to start it up.
Right. Yeah, I was trying to find this. Now,
let me tell you something. Again, you know, we did our best here in Horry County, and we've had, you know, forays, if you will, into building independent institutions, and we actually had an independent institution. It was a barber school that we had started in here in Horry County. But again, you know, we had the building, we started the business, we opened up the school, there was like a study area, there was all kind of stuff going on in there where we could do lectures and stuff out of there. But to our dismay, we had realized way too late that we had not built a movement in which without the movement, it wasn't being stressed enough to the community why this institution is important.
Yeah.
And because we had failed to adequately lay the groundwork for the movement of which this independent institution could emerge, the people didn't see the utility of it. And we just didn't have community support and ended up floundering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know?
So one of the things that Geechee was saying was that he was saying that we need to mass gas on being independent, judging that everything going on right now, these buckers have something up their sleeve. And I wanted to say something. So, you know, when they talk about like the final solution, like there's a final solution for Black folk, right? And they're implementing those things. And then something that Black folks can, you know, relate to is the Bible. When the Bible talks about the year of tribulation, people are going to have itchy ears, and the itchy ears going to make them believe anything going. So it's like, I hear the urgency, right? It sounds good, it's beautiful. But the people who've been organizing for the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, but they've been urgent, right? And the other people haven't been urgent. So they've been trying to mash the gas for 50, 60 years now. And so now that other people are being aware of it, they're like, okay, let's just mash the gas. It's like, well, the reality is a lot of people are going to join some neo-colonialism. A lot of people are going to join the Black, like, because they're not prepared. Like, there's no way to really go from A to Z without going through the alphabets. As part of that, going through the alphabet is actually sit down and study and know what the hell you're talking about and what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like, so there's really no way to study. I would say, well, there's really no way to study fast, right? Like, study and get prepared fast. And so I think that's the kind of trick. Like, that's the kind of scary part. Like, that, yeah, people are going to be open to these other things, but it's a lot of internal work that has to be done for you to only not understand what the hell is going on, and you can actually know what that final solution is, but actually what's going to solve it, right? Because, you know, if you wake up today and you be like, yeah, something's happening, and you wake up, okay, we're going to have to circulate the black dollar. You know good and well, like, there's a good chance you're not prepared for what's going to happen. You know what I mean? Like, you're probably going to get swept up with a black capitalist or whatever. But so I understand the urgency, but can you speak to, like, and I know you say it has to be done right. Can you speak to the concept of like, yo, we ain't no skipping stages. Like, you don't skip stages when you build a house. So speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, like I've said already, we can't go directly. We can't go directly to the. It can't just from nothing to complete acceptance and loyalty to independent Black institutions. You know, there's points in between there that have to be met. You know, goals that have to be achieved between from the A, like you said, and the Z of independent Black institutions. You know, and we're going to have to take those steps. You know, like I said, there's the movement building, there's the shattering, and I hope that this lecture can play a role in that to a certain extent, the shattering the myths. Because even if let's say we knew nothing about this and say, okay, I'm all about action. I'm tired of all this talking. Let's have action, okay? And I'm about solutions. But if the solutions are based on faulty information, the solution is going to fail. Okay? You can't base a solution on myth. You can't base a solution on the myth of Black deviancy. You can't base a solution on the myth of Black buying power. You can't base a solution of the myth of Black people, Black there not being any good Black or strong Black families. Because any solution, like I always tell you, I say it all the time, you know, Fred Hampton, we come up with solutions that don't solve, conclusions that don't conclude, and answers that don't answer. Because we're allowed to accept the foundational ideology or the foundational premise for the solution. We accept it whole cloth without examining it. And therefore, when we base it on that sand, when we try to build on that sand and the whole thing sinks, we all see Black people just don't want to do nothing. Crabs in a bucket, crabs in a bucket. See, these folks, we tried to teach these people about spending their money wisely, and this program, and they still under oppress. See, just Negroes just don't want to do nothing. It's usually the Black folks who end up getting blamed. You know.
Any other questions before we wrap up? Thank you for the comments, the questions, everybody for coming in. And as you are asking your questions, Asafo, any final things you want to share or say?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for their participation. I want to thank everyone for looking or viewing this. And it will be up on our YouTube channel, the bARTer and Build Think Tank's YouTube channel. I also want to invite all of you who are interested to look us up or contact us. Oh, the pamphlet. Almost forgot.
Yeah. I was actually going to remind you of the pamphlet and remind what I was about to show and ask, but go ahead, finish.
Yeah. So the pamphlet is basically the presentation, but everything that I discussed in the presentation is in the pamphlet. Okay, so you can take the information and you'll have it actually written out so you can study it more closely. You can look at the sources, you can look at the reports and everything like that. Okay, so we do have a pamphlet available that is tied to this lecture. Okay, and I invite everyone to look us up on Facebook. We have a page on Facebook. We have a YouTube channel, and like I showed you all the email address. If you have any concerns or questions, you can always look us up or email us.
Thank you. Right. So one of the things I'm gonna share this because I this is kind of relevant to the conversation. I shared this post the other day, and I know nobody wasn't gonna respond because it seems like those people who talk, they kind of like they get quiet when you have to ask questions or they might call you whatever. But it was about nation building, and let's see if I'm here. Appreciate it. All right, so it was a post trying to figure out, like, when people say nation building, I'm curious, right? Going from where we at right now to nation building. And sometimes they speak as if we're already there. So I'm like, is this the kind of nation building you're talking about, right? No aid, right? Because you say don't depend on whitey no more. No imports. Can we defend ourselves? We, Tulsa couldn't. Self-sufficient, no exports, closed economy. Like the way people speak when you talk about circulating the black dollar, when the way people speak, I'm like, is this literally like the nation that you're trying to build? Like, what are we mass producing? What are we, how are we going to protect our, like, like the serious questions when you talk about nation building, but it's kind of like crickets, or like, well, I ain't really thought that far, or oh, you being negative, or all these thoughts. But I'm like, I mean, if we're gonna use English words, I just think we should be serious about the English words that we're using. So,
well, I think again this is why that's why Barter and Bill think tank is so important. Because we're bringing people into the movement. The intellectual inquiry must be there. The demands for intellectual development must be in place for people to call themselves as being a part of this movement. Okay, and I'm not just talking about reading black material. If we're going to talk about nation building is a geopolitical term. Okay, so we might want to know a little bit about geopolitics before we start talking about nation building. Okay, we might want to know things about the role that the United Nations play, or the role that the IMF and the World Bank play. And what is it about these African nations and third world and fourth world nations, and hell, even some second world nations, that have to rely on the predatory loans from the IMF and the World Bank, knowing that these organizations are predatory, but they need the money because they don't have it any other way. It's not like they can circulate the black dollar in the African nation and that's supposed to build something. They need an influx of capital coming in order to build the infrastructure. And then the only way that I guess they found that the only way that they can get that type of money is by going to the IMF and the World Bank. Okay, so that in and of itself should be instructive for us, that we're not going to be able to come out here and sell sea moss and T-shirts and incense and shea butter to each other and think we're going to build a nation.
To each other.
It's not going to happen that way.
That's like even the concept of like when you said to each other, it was small. I don't know if they heard it, but like that's you're literally saying we just gonna use this. But when you said about the IMF, right? A lot of times, although they're getting those loans, right, the money that they're using to build stuff is still ain't really going back to them. So it's almost like you paying the people that you get a loan from to build shit for you and give you other resources. So it's kind of like it's really, I think it's even worse than it sounds. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, so yeah, like I guess when it comes to surface things, and there's things that, I'm pretty sure I've been there before. And I'm probably still there in certain levels, but, I don't know. I think being serious about certain things makes more sense than to kind of approach it with like, I've had people say stuff like, talk about this black stuff, but I don't know anything. I mean, the black dollar, whatever, but I don't know anything about economics, or I'm not an economist. It's kind of like there's no way you could, intelligently speak about this if you're not like well studied or versed on at least something that pertains to that. So, yeah, I think this is an important conversation, especially when it comes to education, schooling, supporting ameliorative type solutions that. I don't want to say it doesn't do anything, but it's not really moving the needle, right? And we talked about the example where somebody's terrorizing your neighborhood, building a swimming pool to help the kids cope with being terrorized. It's not, it's not that great, right? So we appreciate your lecture tonight, man.
So again, I wanna thank everyone. And look, like I said, I'm hint hint, I guess, hint hint. For as far as I know, I don't ever intend on charging people for these lectures, but donations are always welcome and appreciated.
Absolutely.
But other than that, bARTer and Build Think Tank, if you're ready, if you're wanting to learn, and we have some projects coming out, and we're going to continuously do lectures. Other members of our group will bring lectures as well. We're always welcome to. You're always welcome to join up with us and participate. And one of the ways that you can contact us, is email or find us on Facebook. I just want to reiterate that. Okay.
Absolutely. All right, y'all. So thank y'all for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time.
Peace.